We're going to talk about, where traditional IAM breaks and how we rethink trust for autonomous systems. So Elisa, Homayun, Itamar, and Alexis, can you join us on stage, please?
Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm Elisa Vedrapo. I'm a leader in identity and practitioner. I'm considering myself more a practitioner than a manager or leader, but because I'm still growing. But since the beginning of this year, I started to get concerned. I started to lead human identities, identity in general in the organization I lead, and I started to see Agentic AI being a thing. The business started to build their own agents without even consulting us. So it was like, this is here, and what do I do? And I started to educate it myself. I got in touch with Mr. NHI, and I started to literally freak out. So I wanted to be here to make some questions to experts, and I'm very pleased to be part of this panel because, in my opinion, traditional IAM has been a problem. We are still struggling with human identities, but now that we have agentic AI, it explodes. So what do we do? Shall we start over, start new traditional or new AI? So that is this panel where traditional breaks and how do we trust the autonomous identities now. So I would like for you to introduce yourselves. I had some background about each of you, but I prefer to give you the mic for introduction.
Hi everyone, Homayun Yaqub. I lead our advisory service at Digital Hands, and prior to that, sort of on all sides of the table, been a practitioner, a CISO, and then also in the throes of a startup as well. Great to be here.
Hi, my name is Itamar Appelblad. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Token Security. Being in cybersecurity for the past 18 years, focusing in identity, non-human identity, and now AI agents. And I just became a big fan of Mr. NHI rap career. I really loved it. Good job.
And I'm Alexis Moise. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Clarity Security. Prior to this, I got to live everyone in this room's life, running identity at a publicly traded company, and prior to that at Texas A&M with 150,000 active identities at any given time. So lived your life, sat your seat, and now I'm here to fix all of the sins created by all the identity providers over the last 25 years.
So I have some questions written. So we prepare a little bit, but I prefer them to start improvising. So Alexis, traditional IAM worked because identities were slow, scarce, and predictable. I actually don't think it worked completely, but anyway. Which of those properties, slow, scarce, and predictable, disappears first with autonomous agents? And why does the single loss collapse existing IAM models?
I don't think traditional IAM has ever worked. Identity has never been slow. It's never been stagnant. Right, coming from an organization that onboarded and offboarded 60,000 people over the course of a week every semester, right, and over the summer, it was always incredibly fast. And if you look out now, right, it's certainly proliferating a little bit faster, but traditional identity has never really kept up. We just kind of tell ourselves that and hope we get by and hope we don't get breached at the end of every single day. But, right, 85% of all breaches are still identity-based, and they're just finding unmanaged credentials. So it's not like we're protected today.
Yeah, unfortunately I agree, but it's been humans, when they join an organization, they stay for at least a few months or years, contractors or vendors or employees, it depends, but still the access they may have evolves. So yeah,
I agree with that, right? Like there is a difference between how agents and NHI work, right? It's a much shorter time horizon, but the principles that we have talked about for 25 years are still there and we should still be using, right? Short-lived access, short-lived identity, short-lived credentials. Not everybody is logging into Salesforce every day. I know I'm not. Well, most days I am, but Saturdays and Sundays I'm not. I don't need access on those days.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment I log out, I should lose that access, which is the same principle that should be true with non-humans and agents, right?
Itamar?
Yeah, I do think that fundamentally AI agents are unpredictable, and this is a big change into how we treat identities before. Basically, we had humans that are unpredictable, but in a bit of like a small scale, and then we had machine accounts that are in a much faster scale, but super predictable, or at least deterministic, right? And AI agents is just the mix of both of them, and that's great. We do need to have a fundamental change on how we treat those agents and how we verify the access and manage them in scale, which we'll talk about for sure.
Humayun, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, just to reinforce those points, I think Lalit and a few others in the beginning talked about the idea that agents represent another flavor of non-human identity. I would go so far as to say it's a completely distinct new identity class. The agents, relative to how they can operate, their ability to spawn sub-agents create a very different paradigm. And it's more than just an inflection point in the identity space. It fundamentally is something that challenges our convention in terms of how we have treated identity management in the past.
Itamar, legacy IAM assumes access can be defined in advance. What happens to access governance when an identity future action cannot be known at the time of the access when it's granted?
Yeah, I think that basically we need to change our mindset from just governing access to governing the intent of the agent, looking at what the agent is trying to do, and is it correlated and makes sense based on the intent or the purpose of the agent. And this is a bit of a different way of thinking about agents' interactions and moving from a very static guardrails into something that is dynamic and validating the agent in real time based on the actions that you're trying to do, because agents are pursuing a goal just like human, but they are way less predictable and don't have the common sense sometimes that we have. So I think that's something that really changes.
Alexis?
Anybody who's worked with humans knows there is no common sense amongst most of the rest of the business. But I do agree fundamentally that intent-driven provisioning, intent-driven access is the way to go. I think that should be applied to humans and non-humans and agents as well, right? Just because patching NHI thinks, hey, I need full admin access or sudo access isn't necessarily true. Humans don't necessarily need to be admins in X, Y, or Z application, right? And it should be very intent, hey, I'm logging in to do RevOps stuff, or I'm logging in to go specifically patch this one package on this server, or I'm an agent going to do something. Everything should be intent-driven at the end of the day.
Humayun?
Yeah, I think, I agree with both the other panelists. The idea of intent, I think, is foundational. I think it also puts a spotlight on challenging the convention of what we mean by governance. Governance historically has been, that stream of consciousness that sits along somewhere, that GRC arc, where we focus on policies, we focus on controls, we do our audits, etc. Dynamic governance is now sort of a new shift, right? And dynamic governance stays pace with the idea of intent. Agents move at a pace and are not deterministic. They are probabilistic, designed to be as useful as possible, and therefore addressing governance based on context and continuously adjusting based on that. Now, I say this as sort of a conceptual problem, right? A conceptual model that you know, we need to explore and understand how to operationalize. I'm not sure we're quite there yet, mostly because we're still learning what defines an agent lifecycle, if you can even use sort of that convention around an agent, and that a lifecycle does in fact exist. So,
yeah, when we provision humans, we ask justification, and that might be the intent. But the intent in access reviews is reviewed every 3 months, so probably that doesn't apply to agents anymore. Do you agree, or how does it apply to humans also?
I definitely agree with that. It doesn't really apply, right? Short-lived agents, hey, I'm going to go do a thing, it's going to last 15 seconds. And really, to kind of your point, the life cycle begins and ends at the request at this point, where I'm going to do a thing. That is when the joiner starts, and then I'm done doing the thing.
Mm-hmm.
That is where the lever happens.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking at a world in every 3 months, it doesn't matter, right, anymore. Yeah. And if you're doing very like ephemeral access for humans, it also stops mattering. User access reviews as a whole, I don't think matter, and that's kind of my goal, is to eliminate access reviews altogether, not just run them daily, but conceptually they shouldn't really be a thing, a necessity, ideally, as we get towards very intent-driven, very like risk-focused. How do I grant access in the least risky possible way to get somebody's job done and take it away the moment they're done doing that task? Mm-hmm. Ideal world.
So Alexis, reinforcing on that, a concept like least privilege, zero standing privilege, just in time, we're designing for episodic human behavior. At machine speed, do these become implementation details, or do they fundamentally lose meaning?
Definitely implementation details. Every developer, everybody building agents, and everybody obviously thinks of themselves as developers now, just because they have access to Claude Code. It should be implementation details, right? Having something on the system that's acts as like an access gateway, where, hey, make sure things are hooked up appropriately, and if we're seeing any sort of input, any sort of right prompting, and it's not going through an access gateway, what are you doing? And shut down and like cut off those sessions. But that is still very much built on least privilege and just in time. And if we're not doing that, I'm not quite sure what the alternative to least privilege or just in time is, other than just building standing permissions.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that least privilege and different concept should change now and be way more dynamic. Absolutely. What I think that Alexis said that I'm still like linger in my mind is there's other processes like access reviews. Should it even be exist in a world where when things are so dynamic? And it makes you ask more philosophical questions about a lot of our day-to-day work that we're doing today. How things should change. Are we doing it because it's just checking a box, or is it provide a real value? And maybe going here a bit zooming out, but I think that the best IAM teams that I'm working with and that get the agentic story right are the teams that are trying themselves, implementing agents as part of their own day-to-day activities, that helping them work much faster. So yes, least privilege and other principles, we should do it in a way more dynamic processes. But even maybe as an advice to the entire team here is that try to implement some agents yourself and see how some of those fundamentals are completely break down, and then start to think, okay, how can I support that? And then how can I support that in scale?
Mayun, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the concept of a dynamic approach to these traditional approaches, and that's because the traditional approaches are foundationally sound. Just-in-time provisioning, least privileged, we all love and hate zero trust as both a moniker and a concept that we've tried to operationalize. All of this, I think, fundamentally remains sound and foundational. Now, this overlay of it becoming dynamic creates a reality. If you, as I'm sure all of us read sort of the various so-called security whisperers that are out there, most of them speak around this idea that the only way to address security in the AI age is with AI itself. And so to Ittamar's point, how do we become dynamic? First begin with our own process of sort of self-reflection with this idea of deploying a set of agents, understand the agent path, the agent, and I'll use the term lifecycle, even though sometimes it's still a bit nebulous, but ultimately to be able to redefine a set of guardrails, but those guardrails actually become dynamic in nature. Again, concept that needs to be operationalized, but fundamentally one that's focused on understanding intent all the way through. It's really a spin on how we've talked about behavior, because behavior is that retrospective look back, but ultimately context is something that's continuously evolving over that life cycle of that agent, and then being able to have better visibility on it.
So Homayun, following on that, if authorization decisions must be made continuously in real time without human checkpoints, what becomes the new unit of trust? The identity, the request, the behavior pattern, or the evolving context?
Yes. I've thought about this question since you posted last week. I go through this quick little exercise with the various AI models, the various learning models that are out there every couple of days, and I start with the same question: are you intelligent? Sure, it's a nod to sort of the meaning of life and sort of that existential moment of reality in the mornings, but it's interesting how the answer and the response has evolved over time with the learning models. What has come out consistently, though, despite some of the wrapping around it, is this notion that the response that AI provides back is, I'm not intelligent, but I'm designed to be as useful as possible. That comment actually is more scary than it suggesting that it's intelligent. And so the reason why I said yes to all is because it is, in fact, a reality that we face when an agent no longer adopts or acts like what we have known to be very binary in nature, human beings being very deterministic. They sit on a life cycle. Every semester we have new students, et cetera, or employees that are hired and fired and go through that life cycle. Agents operate very differently and operate at a scale that now challenges the convention, but that does put a spotlight on what we've talked about, and we probably spent a lot of time on it by design at the beginning, on the notion of intent, on the notion of context. I think what one of the previous panelists also mentioned, context. Being able to understand context helps inform then guardrails. Guardrails are foundational, but guardrails also themselves need to be dynamic, and we've talked about that a couple times, specifically because it then speaks to not just the traditional notion of security, but more importantly around posture. Posture now defines things in terms of exposure, and exposure then creates an opportunity space, and that opportunity space is really what we're trying to understand. Along the agent's useful path, for it to be useful, where do we have the opportunity to establish controls? Where do we have the opportunity to establish those guardrails? And where do we have the opportunity to define, and someone else mentioned it as well, those choke points. And I think those choke points are key, because that allows then for the implementation of a dynamic control as well when we feel that exposure has gotten too high and it's strayed off of purpose. It might still think, the agent might still think it's being useful, but in fact it's now just creating exposure that outlives its ability to be useful.
Alexis, Itamar, you want to go first?
I think that what you just brought up is interesting, and in more general perspective, we need to ask ourselves what makes AI agents useful. I mean, without access, they're not useful. Without autonomy, they are not useful. So basically, the entire way of us in the enterprise implementing and deploying agents is allowing them to connect to important resources and giving them the autonomy, but that's also how we define risk. And the folks here, all of us, have a very important job, because in the past 2 years, when we asked CISOs how do they secure AI, many of them talked about prompt injection, about protect what the AI says. Right now, we're moving to a place where we need to protect what the AI does. And that's basically an important shift, and it is an identity problem. So right now, we see more and more IAM teams are being the key individuals that are defining how to govern AI agents and how to adopt AI agents in the organization in a secure way. And just wanted to point it out there, and I agree with what you said, yeah.
Alexis, anything to add?
Terrible panelist answer. I just agree with both of them. I don't have much to add to it. You'll both said it very, very well.
Okay, thank you. And the last question I have prepared is for Alexis. Are we actually facing an IAM failure, or is a deeper failure of how we historically define trust, control, accountability in the identity systems?
I don't know if we're facing an IAM failure as much as our nose is being rubbed in it, that we thought Active Directory was enough, and then we thought, moving to SSO was enough, and that we thought, long-standing permissions were enough and access reviews were enough, right? We are being faced with, hey, right, this thing lasts for 10 seconds, and it interprets itself as being useful if it continues its own permissions. And it only gets cut off when a human cuts it off or stops the session. So we're just being faced with it, and we're finally dealing with it, which I started speaking on this in 2023 about how there's massive failures in identity and we all need to address it, and finally I'm proven right, so that feels kind of nice. But yeah, it's not a new failure, it's an existing one that we're finally dealing with.
Humayun, what do you think?
Yeah. At the risk of repeating what Alexis said, I agree as well. I will say, look, when we talk about identity, and we talk about identity in the AI age, we'll let the folks who debate this for a living do it, but it's equal parts attack surface, it's equal parts control plane, it's equal parts workload. I think, to Alexis' point, what identity in the AI era really does identify is it being the focal point of security. I'll go out and say that as a former CISO, it really is fundamental. We're no longer just constrained by sort of these traditional notions of thinking about access management, authentication, privilege. We're thinking about now an agent that's deployed against a very precise use case that has nothing to do with security. It has to do with a business case that needs to be solved. Now, we've always talked about getting closer to creating business value. Well, fundamentally now, the exposure that's created is around the notion of that business case. And that business case or that operational case now creates a different approach towards how we've addressed. None of this goes away from the idea of it being a failure and start over, but it does put a spotlight on and challenge the conventions around these definitional terms that we've come to understand around access management, around governance, around provisioning, around trust. Trust is now one where it's not a binary action. It fundamentally does become a dynamic action. Trust will have to evolve. And to do that at pace with an agent will require agent use as well, will require AI as well. There's just no way to keep up with the volume. I think one of the previous panelists talked about millions of events. The logs themselves not only become a system problem, but then ultimately become fundamentally a visibility problem as well.
Itamar?
Yeah, look, I agree with what the panelist said. IAM maybe never worked, but it's for sure not going to work in the future as we do things today. So someone once told me that it's pretty stupid to try to solve future of the problem with the tool of the past. So we need to ask ourselves, how do we change some of our processes, and moving from a static perspective and very manual to a way more dynamic and automated processes. My previous startup, I had a small problem, so I hired a guy that will tackle this problem, and he did that, and everything was good. But then things scaled up, and we had way more customers that we needed to support, and it's completely broke down. I needed to solve it from the foundations, and I think that right now we are in the same situation where we need to ask ourselves, okay, maybe this is actually a blast for the entire IAM community, where right now this such an amazing transformational technology that none of us in this room can stop it from being adopted in the enterprise. So how can we allow to do that and change our behavior in order to support this technology in a much more efficient way? So I think I'm pretty optimistic about how things going to shape in the future.
Any final thoughts before we go? I don't know if we have time for questions. No? Okay, so final thoughts before the next panel? Mayun or Alexis?
Yeah, I agree. I'm very optimistic about the future. We're finally being forced to try new things, do new things, think about problems in different ways, which spawns innovation, right? Like, we shouldn't be afraid of it. We should be very excited to take on the problem, take on our, right, like the future, right? And kind of work through it together. That's why I love Identiverse, is bringing together people who actually care to solve identity problems, come up with amazing solutions. Maybe somebody's in the corner screaming about some problem that may not be a real problem today, but will be in 3 years, and we can all latch on to them and kind of solve problems together. So very optimistic.
Mayun?
I'm going to say it, agree as well. You know, we've always talked about the idea of a single pane of glass in security. It's been kind of the holy grail of security. You know, I have roots in the military, and you know, the commanders always talked about the common operational picture. Just another variation of this whole idea of a single pane of glass. But a common operational picture for identity. It's interesting because if you look at, and I'm speaking obviously to solutions providers and the innovators in the room, being able to understand the problem a bit more holistically. You know, we've addressed the complexity of the problem through a variety of different solutions, et cetera. But it would be interesting to see this idea of looking at identity through the lens of managing the identity posture. And it puts a spin on the whole notion of life cycle, and less on the life cycle, but more about posture and the idea and framed around exposure. How do we understand exposure? How do we understand from the time of provisioning through time of use in access? As it continues down that path, where do we understand those touch points? Where are those dependencies? And then where are ultimately those exposure points created? So, you know, call out to the innovators in the room, to Alexis' point, there are folks who are sort of chomping at the bit to address the problem, but it would be an interesting thing to work through. So.
And Itamar, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll try to take it to a different route, to not just agree with what we're all saying. Right now, every organization that we are tapping, we see a lot of local agents, Cloud Code, Cowork. Now, I think that don't try today to become quantum proof, which means to solve the future where you have a multi-agents ecosystem that interacting with agent to agent to agent to agent. That, you know, start with a bit of a smaller step. Understand which agents are deployed today. How can you support those use cases in a larger scale, and then expand into more complex challenges.
Thank you. So I hope all this conversation gave you a lot of curiosity for what is coming. In the next sessions, we will have more deep dive. So thank you, Lalit, for the opportunity, and I hope you like it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Elisa, Amani, and Itamar, and Alexis. Again, some great insights there. Great to see that everybody is optimistic about where things are going. I'm, for one, optimistic, but I'm always a half glass empty kind of guy, and I'm actually quite scared about what the new reality brings. You know, we haven't still solved, I think, the human problem. I think, you know, from what we asked at the beginning of the session, how many people are addressing NHI risks, and it was, what, 15% of the audience. And now, you know, at machine speed, we're getting thousands, millions of agents that are coming. So I think, yeah, the IAM industry as a whole needs to move at lightning speed. I kind of fear that, you know, we'll be talking about this in a year's time, 2 years' time, and still haven't really solved things for NHIs, let alone the agentic world. But hopefully, you know, AI for security, security for AI we'll see leaps and bounds, and I hope in a year's time we'll be in a much different place, but I'm still very nervous and skeptical about what's out there, and I think the attackers are going to be way ahead. I'm actually doing a talk in a couple of days on the internal threat with agents, and I think the internal threat is going to become much bigger, so we need to be a lot more nimble.